Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio. And now, here is Walter Bingham.
Hello and welcome to the program for the 13th of October 2020, which in the Hebrew calendar is the 25th day of Tishrei 5781. I am Walter Bingham. We have just celebrated the festival of Sukkot, which usually brings about 5,000 Christians from all corners of the world to Israel to celebrate the Feast of the Tabernacles, organized by the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, who were looking forward to celebrate their 40th anniversary. But this year, the streets of Jerusalem are silent, devoid of visitors, because we are in a total lockdown. But the Walter Bingham File is going out as usual to the faithful listeners of Israel News Talk Radio and the many new listeners who join the faithful every week. Today's subject matter is of great importance. It covers aspects of the US presidential election, including the apparently uncontrolled election expenditure, and a brief assessment of the first of the three scheduled debates between the two presidential contenders. Dominating the news in the United States that is of great consequence is the confirmation hearing of Judge Amy Coney Barrett as Justice of the Supreme Court. And I shall be talking about that. Also in the program, The Rabbit in the Hat, a political commentary on a not unusual event in Israel, and a great deal more. Any election, whether the chairman of a synagogue, the CEO of a corporation, or the President of the United States should, apart from obvious qualifications, be decided on his or her plans during the elected term. There will be public meetings where the contenders will lay out their agenda and maybe advertisements trying to persuade the people to vote one way or another. So far, only one of the three scheduled debates between the two contenders for the forthcoming US presidential elections, President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden, has taken place. Rather than the expected fireworks from Trump to get Biden rattled, it was Trump who at times lost his composure with frequent interruptions. Back after the break.
The return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel was prophesied in the Bible thousands of years ago and is coming true today. Shalom. Join me, Josh Wander, on Israel Unplugged. Listen in as we delve into the spiritual and physical aspects of the Jewish return to Zion. We'll discuss the biblically mandated, historic, and of course practical understandings of this incredible transition from exile to redemption. That's Israel Unplugged, every Monday on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
And now, here is Walter Bingham.
Good to have you back. During the presidential debate, rather than the expected fireworks from Trump to get Biden rattled, it was Trump who at times lost his composure with frequent interruptions. Biden, who on the face of it looked like a schoolteacher, resorted to insults, calling Trump a liar, a clown, a fool, and asked him to shut up, man, which did not make him appear presidential. Both participants talked over each other, defeating the purpose of letting the public hear their points. As a result of this cacophony, the U.S. Commission on Presidential Debates is now considering amendments to the format for the next debates. Anyway, I found it doubtful if any minds were changed following the debate. On balance, Trump, who did not lower himself by returning insults, did slightly better. But now to election expenditure. Although in the United States there is a complicated system of permissible amounts of contributions As I understand it, the regulations stipulate various ceilings dependent on the channels through which they are given and how they are received. I confess that, not being from the US, I had difficulty in understanding the charts, which seemed to me extremely complicated and open to loopholes. The result is obvious. The presidential candidates for 2020 will have different amounts available, adding up to millions of dollars to spend for propaganda. In effect, that means that whoever has more money has a better chance not only to influence the voting, but to actually buy the result. The Miami Herald is reporting that the Republican Jewish coalition in South Florida is spending $3.5 million in TV ads directed at the 500,000 Jews who live in the area. One of the ads includes the following statement: "Only one candidate has stood with the Jewish community, President Donald Trump, the most pro-Israel president in history." Another report in the same paper states that a conservative Jewish advocacy organization announced they are about to embark on, quote, "the largest, most sophisticated, most targeted state-of-the-art campaign in history," that they plan to spend up to $10 million this fall in Florida and other swing states on behalf of the president, Donald Trump. In effect, that means that whoever has more money has a better chance to not only influence the voting, but to actually buy the result. Unfortunately, Israel no longer plays a great part in the American Jewish vote. The super-rich defend their interests by donations for specific purposes within the campaign of their favorite candidate. In 2016, large donations facilitated access to the president, and even positions in his administration, like WWE co-founder Linda McMahon, who I learned contributed $152,700 to Trump's victory in 2016, and was appointed by Trump to head the Small Business Administration. I believe WWE is an American integrated media and entertainment company that is primarily known for professional wrestling. According to Forbes, this year some 80 billionaires have each contributed to the Trump campaign, but they could be found on both sides of the political spectrum. $100 million were set aside by former mayor of New York and CEO of a major communication network, Michael Bloomberg, for anti-Trump advertisements in swing states. This campaign brings out the worst in people. The Jewish Democratic Council of America paid for a 30-second advertisement that draws parallels between the rise of fascism in Germany and the Trump presidency. That, of course, is utter nonsense. I lived there during that period, and I know. So, rather than allow the voters to assess the best person for the job, judging by their previous achievements and declared plans, they are already, for as much as a year before the election, bombarded by psychologically constructed advertisements costing millions. Now a word about the election logistics, which it seems leave much to be desired. There is the so-called vote harvesting by inducements and collecting the completed ballots, particularly from the elderly and in poorer areas. All officially illegal, but practiced. Because of the coronavirus, many Americans are concerned to stand in line at polling stations, and therefore voting in person will be severely reduced. Consequently, ballots will be mass-mailed by post, and that is of great concern to President Trump, who believes that mass mailings will lead to fraud if old data is being used and addresses are not being checked. Upward mobility in the US causes frequent address changes, as I know from my own extended family. Trump's fear is that ballot forms can collect in letterboxes and be misused. He suggests a method of absentee voter, by which a person can request a ballot paper and when returned and endorsed by a suitable witness, the identity can be checked and the vote is reliable. There is also confusion about the cut-off date for late arrival of returned ballots. Should it be the postmark or the arrival date that determines validity? In light of those concerns, it is possible that President Trump will contest the result should it go against him. If that happens, the matter would be referred to the Supreme Court. That's why the Republican-controlled Senate is trying to expedite the confirmation of Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, which would give the Republicans a 6-3 majority on the bench. Now the congressional confirmation hearing has begun for Judge Barrett to become Justice of the Supreme Court. Because she has an exemplary record on the bench and there is nothing in her past that her opponents could uncover, the concentration of objections will be based on her religion and on the question of the Affordable Care Act, the insurance policies, known as Obamacare. That is totally irrelevant in light of her record. Barrett, who is currently a federal judge on the Seventh Circuit, is a devout practicing Catholic, adhering strictly to the dogma which considers same-sex marriage, abortion, and the practices of LTGB, amongst others, against morality and sinful. The opposition is concerned that this position will dominate or at least influence her judgment rather than the strict application of the law. Barrett's appointment to the Seventh Circuit was a bipartisan decision made only 3 years ago by this very Senate. And so far, nothing in her judgments points to a religious bias, which she also vehemently denies. The Republican-dominated Senate intends to complete her election to the Supreme Court well before the presidential election on November 3rd. The Democrats argue that this is unconstitutional during a presidential election year and particularly days before the election and should be left to the next president, which indicates that they are extremely confident of winning. That, however, would leave an even number of judges on the Supreme Court, which could cause problems if there were an election result dispute going before the court. Even the late liberal judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that a president is elected for the full term of 4 years, and that means that his presidential duties and privileges can be exercised to the very end of this term. If appointed, Justice Barrett will be one of 6 Catholics on the bench, joined by an Episcopalian who was raised as a Catholic, and 2 Jewish justices. It is argued that this combination does not fairly represent the religious composition of the country that only has 20% of Catholics and 2% of Jews, and that's another reason given by the opposition. I mentioned earlier that Biden refused to answer if the Democrats would pack the court, which means to enlarge the number of judges to negate the present Republican advantage. That implies a yes, changing a long tradition of 9 judges. Trump appears to have overcome his infection with COVID-19 and proudly announced that he is no longer on any medication and that he will continue with his mass rallies as before. It was a Democrat argument that President Trump was heavily under the influence of drugs and incapable to conduct the affairs of state, and that he should therefore be removed from office by evoking the 25th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which allows a president to be removed if he is considered incapable of conducting the affairs of state. That is now firmly out of the question. There is, however, a dark cloud on the horizon. It is known that even if on the face of it a complete cure will have been effected, there still remain residual dormant effects that may manifest themselves at any time and are often very serious, particularly in persons of advanced age. But Trump has once again shown his resilience, energy, and ability to engender confidence to continue as president for 4 more years. Former Vice President Biden, who aims to appear as the capable and experienced elder statesman, has so far refused to answer reporters' several questions of national importance. Back again soon. Keep it here.
Hi everyone, this is Andrea Simento from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Simento, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Did you know this psalm and many others were composed by a Jewish shepherd and musician who later became a king? Would you like to know some of the inner meanings of psalms to help you connect with God and strengthen your soul? An exciting and easy-to-read book is now available which will help you do just that. Software for the Soul, Psalms for Everyone, available on Kindle, Audible, and Amazon.com. Software for the Soul.
And now, here is Walter Bingham.
Welcome back. Former Vice President Biden, who aims to appear as the capable and experienced elder statesman, has so far refused to answer reporters' several questions of national importance. That raises the suspicion that he acts as a Trojan horse for the radical socialist left in Congress. The decision of the American people on November the 3rd will shape the future not only of the United States of America, but of the world for the next few decades. Now for some news from Israel. It's interesting that it takes an opinion poll showing a dramatic fall in the Knesset seats for Likud, if an election were held today, for Netanyahu to consider reverting to his policy declared in May. It was then that he promised to effect sovereignty for the major Jewish population centers in Judea and Samaria immediately after the formation of a government, and that implies building expansion. But as we know to our cost, Netanyahu's promises are dependent on his popularity with his international political peers, in particular Donald Trump. So he agreed to suspend sovereignty in favor of the UAE and Bahrain deals, which would bring him more kudos. Realizing that his popularity even within his Likud party is falling, he is now proposing to circumvent the freeze on building in the territories as agreed in the UAE deal and build 5,500 housing units in those areas. But the Planning Council for Judea and Samaria is under the oversight of alternate Prime Minister Gantz, who, when it will eventually meet after several months, will no doubt influence its decision against building. Should that fail, then as we know, there is always the Supreme Court to rely on to vote against anything benefiting the Yesha communities. So it can be assumed that Netanyahu's rabbit stays firmly in the hat and that there is no cause for jubilation. It was meant for internal consumption to divert the public from more contentious matters. Although we do indeed need housing for the young married couples in the territories that, thank God, are increasing. But affordable housing is needed everywhere in Israel. Too many young families are living in the homes of their parents or in-laws. In order to reduce the high cost of house prices, the government subsidized new building. The problem is that new units were built in areas where the demand was low, like Beersheba, Dimona or Akko. Yet it is Jerusalem and Tel Aviv where the shortage is acute. Most building that is taking place in these two cities are high-rise luxury towers. They are built to the high standard required by foreign investors who want to boast a home in Israel. Yet a considerable number of these apartments stand empty for most of the year, and many remain unsold. The Arnona, the local property tax, has been doubled for apartments that are standing empty because the owners only come maybe for the high holidays or Passover. The reason that parking in the city has become an increasing problem is because almost every open car park, and there were many, has been bought by developers and turned into these luxury apartment complexes for sale at prices that the average Israeli cannot afford. The latest in progress is a 25-story luxury tower just behind Hillel Street in the center of downtown Jerusalem, with a swimming pool, sauna and fitness room, built naturally on one of the few remaining car parks in the city center. The current property tax system creates incentives for municipalities to favor luxury development over affordable family housing because local property tax is the main source of municipal revenue, and large apartments in luxury properties have much higher tax rates than general housing. The Israeli property tax is area-based and depends on the square meters of a given property, and it also reflects the property's location. The IMF News stated in 2017 that in Israel, construction has not kept up with the rising number of households, so the young and the less well-off find it increasingly difficult to afford their own homes, while rising rents take up a growing portion of the income of poorer households. And that situation is especially difficult in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, where it would take the average household 15 years to buy a home, and only if all their income were dedicated to solely this purpose. Nir Barkat, while he was mayor of Jerusalem, repeatedly urged university students to settle permanently in Jerusalem. When I put it to him that instead of suitably priced rental accommodation in the city, there are too many luxury apartments being built, with a large part foreign-owned and unoccupied, Barkat suggested that they could be rented by students. I wonder if he has ever shared rented accommodation with others while at university, and if so, does he remember how they treated the place? In any case, these foreign owners do not have the financial need to rent out their property, but want it to be available for their use at any time they care to visit. In concert with the extension of the light rail and improved bus services to the older Jerusalem suburbs, the municipality is subsidizing the renovation and modernization of old housing stock in those areas, but that alone is not enough to accommodate the workforce that keeps the city operating. I'm thinking of the bus drivers, police, firemen, gas and electricity maintenance workers, and countless more, quite apart from the students at our university and higher education establishments who don't live on campus. That's just a snapshot of our housing problem, and I hope to bring you more in a future program. We have far too much substandard housing in our cities. In any serious democracy, even in Israel's questionable one, any person is free to express their political inclinations in forceful ways, so long as they do not offend race or religious faith. But there are also moral and even ethical constraints to the language used. The venomous article, "Why Jews Won't Vote for Trump," by Douglas Bloomfield in the 1st of October issue of the Jerusalem Post, made me sick. He suggests that Trump is an anti-Semite despite having Jewish grandchildren. The implications of that allegation would be horrendous, particularly as he also accuses Trump of embracing white supremacists. He quotes cliches allegedly showing Trump's disdain for Jews, but without any source references. In a recent briefing, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany read out a string of statements made by the president against white supremacy. As evidence to back his outrageous allegation, Bloomfield quotes the eagle symbol resting on the US flag printed on Trump's campaign shirts, which is similar to the eagle used by the Nazis. Yet the eagle was chosen in 1782 as the emblem of the United States of America because of its long life, great strength, and majestic looks. Is Bloomfield suggesting that this emblem shall also go the way the statue of Christopher Columbus went, because the Nazis also used an eagle? There are at least 11 more countries that I know that are using a similar eagle as a national symbol. Today's Germany, Austria, Poland, Russia, Romania, Albania, Serbia, Montenegro, Indonesia, South Sudan, and Iraqi Kurdistan, and there are more. So much for that argument. Defending George Soros, the self-hating Jew who allegedly was a Nazi informer in his native Hungary, places Bloomfield firmly in the camp of left-wing radicals. Then there is his criticism of Trump's nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett for the Supreme Court to take the place of the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who defended same-sex marriage, LGBT rights, etc., which Bloomfield calls issues of importance to mainstream American Jewry. With 70% of intermarriage, who are the mainstream American Jewry? As for Trump's choice of Barrett, surely Bloomfield did not expect Trump to nominate someone in the footsteps of Bader Ginsburg. Is he not entitled to act according to his political inclination, which is his right under the Constitution? It is surprising that with Bloomfield's extensive experience in promoting Jewish interests in the international arena, he hardly acknowledges Trump's achievements for Israel. Why is the death rate in the US attributed to the coronavirus mainly the fault of Trump? Could Mr. Bloomfield have done better? How dare he accuse the president to follow quacks and not scientists? That is not only without foundation, but also an insult to the experts who are working to contain the virus. Stay tuned to hear my conclusions about Mr. Douglas Bloomfield and the last segment.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
And me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
And now, here is Walter Bingham.
To my knowledge, this know-all's education does not include higher economics or medical qualifications. COVID-19 is a global pandemic, and even the most advanced Western countries have not been able to prevent comparable numbers of deaths with whatever method they have tried. On the contrary, They are also experiencing now a second wave. The fault for the slow progress in fighting this virus is the indiscipline of the populations. The best example is Israel. Finally, the insulting, unbecoming Yiddish expressions with which this educated man describes President Trump's advisors serve to lose the high regard I had for him in the past, despite our political differences. Only 3 weeks ago, Bloomfield probably said Avinu Malkeinu, praying for forgiveness for Sinat Chinum, and his article is the paradigm of baseless hatred. And so I end this program and hope that the many new listeners who've joined us for the first time will have found something interesting and tune in again next week, when I hope to be back again with more news, views and interviews from Israel and the rest of the Jewish world. Until then, this is Walter Bingham wishing you all a safe week, a good week, and please drop in and look if your elderly neighbor is okay. These are very difficult times for the elderly. Goodbye.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling from the rolling hills of Malaya Dumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Malaya Dumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.